this country's long succession of struggles for freedom and social justice, this hall is sacred space. It was in this hall that the NAACP held its first public meeting. This hall, Cooper Union's Great Hall, echoed the voices of women's suffrage leaders, of civil rights leaders, of workers' rights organizers. In 1860, a young Abraham Lincoln came here to give the speech of his political life to that date, a speech against the expansion of slavery, where he said, "Let us have faith that right makes might. And in that faith, let us, to the end, dare to do our duty as we understand it." Aaron lived his short and enormous life to the echo, to the rhythm of those words. We're gathered here today to remember that life, to commemorate his spirit, to honor his legacy, and to reflect on the challenges that he left us, and to silence our cell phones. I'm Ben Whitler. I was a friend of Aaron's. I got to know him in a much less august setting. We had offices next to each other in a former fraternity house in Cambridge, Massachusetts. It was being rented out in rooms to progressive activists. We got to know each other because the wall adjoining our rooms had a huge hole in it. So he could hear my voice as I was on conference calls, and I could hear how fast he typed. We were both intrigued. And we introduced ourselves to each other and started talking and discovered, I first of all discovered he knew more about my field and my work than I knew about his. And secondly, that he knew more about it than I knew about mine, which was a common thing for Aaron when talking to people about anything. But what I loved about Aaron was not only his incredible dedication, his incredible brilliance, but also how much fun he was. We constantly had ridiculous adventures, like when we tried to go see Avatar at an IMAX theater. It was sold out. We wound up in a trapeze gym, flying around sending cell phone videos to my wife, who was extremely alarmed at the turn of events. Aaron had a willingness and excitement to do whatever seemed like the right thing to do. And we're going to hear today from friends and collaborators and allies from all different parts of his life. He started in this work very young. We're also going to, we heard as we entered, a little bit of music that you loved. You loved Pete Seeger, but his music and his legacy. In a moment, I'm going to invite Pete Seeger's grandson to read a quick note that Pete Seeger sent. Wasn't able to join us today. Also hear from another musician from OK Go, Damien Kulash. There are many people who wish they could be here with us. There are some people who are here virtually. This is streaming online at Democracy Now! You can get there through rememberaaaronsw.com. And before we start, I'd like to say thank you to a bunch of people who helped make this happen. First to the team at ThoughtWorks, to Roy Sam, to Holly Webb, to Sean McGee, to Brian Guthrie, and everyone at ThoughtWorks who sponsored this. Aaron was working at ThoughtWorks. They've given him a team of amazing engineers to build essentially whatever he wanted to help activists around the world, and that's what he was doing for the last year before his death. So thanks to them. Thanks to Julia and Democracy Now! Thanks to Anthony Mercurio, to Charles Furman, to Paul Ferris, Luan Al-Haddad, to Jolie McPhee, Nick Allardyce, Rohan Porteous, Mika Sifri, Zephyr Ticha, everyone who helped make this possible. To everyone that sent with us, Aaron Steinberg McCaughan, also to the Baffler, to John Summers, who found the quote that we're finding in the program. A huge number of people were going through all the amazing things that Aaron said. There's no single quote of his that does him justice. But there's so much that he lived for that we'll be remembering today. Thanks also to Beth Whitler and Matt Whitler, my baby son, who might be making himself heard during this event. To Shelley Darden, to Deepa Gupta, and Paul Adler, and all the friends who have come around Aaron's friends and family in these incredibly hard days after his death. One friend of Aaron's who wasn't able to be here is Larry Lessing. Larry went to the funeral on his son's birthday. It's his son's birthday party today. And at a time like this, you need to be with your family. But he said these words. There are no words for this sadness. Tears were made for this. Silent tears. Ferocious hugs. Words were made for happier things, for the world he wanted, for the world he helped to build. Let us save our words for this, for the ways we will make the world he needed, for the ways we will guarantee the justice he was denied. He lives with us, always. He inspires us, forever. Let us never forget who he was. Let us not let him down again. Before I invite our first speaker, Dr. Schwartz, to speak, I'd also like to ask Katama Jackson to bring the words of Pete Seeger to present it out.
My grandfather, Seeger, was very saddened to hear about Aaron. I spoke with him this morning, and he was sorry that he couldn't be able to today. In reading about Aaron and thinking about my grandfather, I definitely see a similarity in what they both stood for. And my grandfather is someone who's always been very, very proud of people who stood up for what they believed in, even if it wasn't popular by everyone. And it's astonishing what Aaron has done in his life. Here are the words of my grandfather. I'm sorry I cannot be present at this memorial for Aaron Schwartz. These modern times are filled with such contradictions that experts are not agreed what the future of the human race will be. But we can agree today that it was a tragedy for this brilliant young man to be so threatened that he hanged himself. Pete Seeger, January 19, 2013. Thank you.
There's two right there. Should we take those two?
And then you go next from Dr. Schwartz. That's why I've got to know her when he was 14.
It was strange coming in here this morning, this afternoon, for his crack. Time seems to be off the table here. I kept thinking I was seeing Aaron in the line outside as I walked inside. There's such a sense of his presence. And then I saw this. I saw the program. That's a photo I shot of Aaron. I licensed it through Creative Commons, so that's one reason it's here. And that happened in part because Aaron educated me on how to do that. Aaron and I were often generational bookends at conferences that we went to. And we went to a lot of them. We would show up and stuff. That's why it makes sense for Aaron to be at something like this. And one of those was Comdex. The Comdex was at one time the biggest conference there was. Sheldon Adelson, the guy who funded a lot of Republican activity, was the guy who ran Comdex and made his bones on that one. But it was a huge conference. And one of the last years it ran in Las Vegas. It was in 2002. It was right after the dot-com boom. The dot-com bust was, in fact, very much a big deal at that time. And I was asked to help put together a panel. It was a debate. It was it was a debate between basically the old and the new, more or less, the internet culture and the traditional culture, however that was defined. And And so they asked me to help put together the internet culture side, and I chose Aaron as a guy on my side, the main guy on my side. I wondered why I would choose a guy so young. At the time he was 50, he just turned 16 at the time of the panel. And it's because he was the right one. He was the right one because he already knew what needed to be known, and he was the guy we're going to hand this off to. Mika told me a great quote before this that really sums up for me the tragedy of this, which is that when we're young, we think our cause is a sprint, and then when we're middle-aged, we think it's a marathon. And when we're old, we think it's a relay race. And Aaron was the guy who wanted to hand this off to. One of the amazing things about maturing, about getting older, is that you realize your job is to leave. Your job is to leave the world better than you found it. You want to leave it in the hands of people who are really good at taking care of the stuff that really matters and standing up for the stuff that really matters. And Aaron did that. When he showed up at this thing, it was interesting. I think Larry had introduced him to me earlier, but I was amazed. He was really small. He was this little guy. There's that picture among the ones that were rotating earlier of Larry Lessig talking to Aaron. That was about when he was that age. And yet, as soon as we started talking, it was like I'm talking to this adult. And I asked him about, school and stuff like that. He asked a teenager. He was done with school. He was done. He moved on. Were you going to high school? No, I'm not doing that. You're going to university? I'm working. On what? Well, there's RSS, there's Creative Commons, there's a whole roster of things that he was active in. David Weinberger wrote a great blog post that said, Aaron wasn't a hacker, he was a builder. But I was explaining hackers this morning to somebody at a bar mitzvah. We just came from one here. I was explaining hackers as I said, they're really the athletes, the athlete programmers, the top athletes. Because it's a respectable term, and it needs to have respect again. Aaron had I believe his mom brought him, that's what I said on my blog. I don't remember exactly, but he was chaperone to the place. But when he was on stage and talking, I listened to what I could of the thing again. Somebody went to the trouble of pulling the audio from an old video that was shot live at that thing. I love the web for that kind of thing. Somebody digs this stuff up. And as I was listening to it, the one thing I heard Aaron vigorously defending and explaining was general purpose computing. Something that's threatened now. He's saying this in 2002 to a bunch of executives. We need to protect general purpose computing. So there's and also his computer was this broken Mac laptop that had you couldn't read it because the light had gone out behind it. Only he could read it. He explained, this is okay because it was still a security precaution. 16 years old. Anyway, so I was thinking about what Aaron stood for. You'll hear a lot of that today. And my note here says geeks and legal-justice. And geeks tend to avoid the legal stuff. They tend not to want to screw with it. They tend to not want to deal with the politics. We're just, Linus Torvalds, I'm an editor for Linux Journal, would say, I only do kernel space, I don't do user space. Politics is in user space, justice is in user space. Aaron was in both. And there are so few geeks that stand out and go that extra space, that extra step to defend the rest of us, to stand, to look out in the future and see what needs to be and work on that, making that happen. And we need justice here. That's what this hall is about. That's the sacred space we heard about earlier. Justice needs to happen here. That's what Pete Seeger stood for, still stands for. That's what we all need to stand for. Whatever that means, in our hearts we know it's there. And the presence that is Aaron in the world persists, and it's in all of our hearts. But we need to do the work that he started. Thank you.
When I met him, Aaron told me he wanted to be really a historian, which is what he's most known for. He was working on a book of history. One chapter was how urban sprawl came to be as the result of a conspiracy of department store owners in Manhattan. It's a true story. Another was about a group of elementary school-aged girls in a factory in Massachusetts who started organizing trade unions before that was a thing, which resulted in the creation of public schools to keep them from organizing workers. The historian Rick Perlstein, who was a good friend of Aaron's and who Aaron loved, wrote a memorial for Aaron where he said that each of us contains a universe in our heads, a world of information and heroes and villains and ideas. The difference was that Aaron had 14 or 15 of them. And different people here today represent different parts of those worlds. The next speaker is Glenn Otis Brown, who was the first executive director of Creative Commons. He's done a million other things in technology and got to know Aaron in another one of those worlds.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you all for having me here. Thank you, Taryn. Thank you all of our friends and family. It's a very humbling thing and a huge honor to be invited to speak here today. I worked with Aaron and had the privilege of getting to work with Aaron in the early days of Creative Commons. It was around 2002, 2003. Aaron was about 15 or 16 around the same time. Doc got to know him. And I didn't have any sort of mentor relationship with Aaron. Technically, he worked for the organization I was running, but that didn't mean that he worked for anybody, as was often the case for the rest of his life. And in fact, at 15 or 16, he was, I can safely say, more emotionally mature than I was at 28 or whatever I was. So we had primarily a work relationship, a very professional relationship, and I want to talk a little bit about that and give you a couple anecdotes from that time that left a mark on me, but also to talk about Aaron as a person and the glimpses of his heart and his soul that I saw, and that I think many others here knew Aaron much more closely than I did over the years. We'll speak to you more later. But Aaron's role at Creative Commons early on was, officially, he was the metadata advisor, meaning he was the person in charge of taking Creative Commons licenses, which were a brand new concept at the time, something that people thought was, I can tell you, insane. Most people thought they were crazy. They thought it was a collective hallucination from one term. And Aaron, who was 15 or 16, came in as a metadata expert, and his job was to translate these legal documents written by teams of lawyers in Silicon Valley and in Cambridge and turn them into machine-readable versions of that. So his ability to connect these different worlds that Doc spoke of began that way. One thing that I found in something that I used to write called the Captain's Blog, which I originally called the Captain's Log in a Star Trek reference. It was an internal kind of newsletter. And both Aaron Schwartz and Larry Lessig corrected me and said it should be called the Captain's Blog. I didn't know what a blog was at the time, so illustrative of our relationship. So, Creative Commons metadata advisor Aaron Schwartz recently returned from the O'Reilly Open Source Conference, where he gave keynote speaker Lawrence Lessig a run for his money, delivering a Python lightning talk on Creative Commons metadata from within Python. The response was great, says Aaron. People kept stopping me in the halls with compliments and questions. That was not to be the last time that was going to be the case with Aaron. Another just fun anecdote that comes from these same set of notes. There was a time when the actual page where you could choose a Creative Commons license, we thought about naming it just kind of for marketing purposes or making it kind of fun. Different names that were going around, we ended up not doing this of course, but different names that were going around were the Commons denominator, the Genie, which I came up with. I have no idea what I was thinking of that. And Aaron's was, appropriately enough, the Liberator, which, as you all know, continues to ring through today in terms of Aaron's healing the boldness spirit that he brought. But I don't want to talk too much about, like I said, Aaron's work. I want to talk a little bit about his heart, his personality and soul, and his sense of humor. Another thing that I found in these notes that I pointed to from Aaron's blog was his licensed haiku. which some of you may have seen. So this is Aaron speaking on his blog, again around the same time, 2002. I think that people really use software licenses to express intentions and don't really read the details of the licenses. So I think that licenses should be made as simple as possible so they don't disagree with the intentions, thus haiku licensing. And I have a feeling most of the people in the room are going to know what this means, but apologies to those of you who don't know what these acronyms are, you will shortly if you don't. Public domain, do what you feel like since the work is abandoned. The law doesn't care. MIT license, take my code with you and do whatever you want, but please don't blame me. LGPL, you can copy this, but make modified versions free in source code form. MPL, like LGPL, except Netscape is allowed to change the license. GPL, if you use this code, you and your children's children must make your source free. And he finishes with RIAA, if you touch this file, my lawyers will come kill you. So kindly refrain. And mostly I think about it, I haven't stopped thinking about this from the moment I heard the terrible news on Saturday morning, is every thought comes back to Aaron's smile, every thought comes back to the smile. It communicated so much more than almost anything else, and everything else that Aaron communicated spoke volumes, but this smile, it's literally the thing I'm constantly coming back to. And I have to comment a little bit on, I think, the what I've just observed kind of in this last week, the touching public outpouring that is primarily, I think, maybe focused on Aaron's work and the amazing things he's accomplished in such a short period of time. I sometimes find myself, to the extent I feel a sense of regret, I try to turn that into a sense of gratitude for, I feel like I didn't maybe see it. I want more of Aaron's soul. I want to have more of his personality. I wish I connected with him more on a personal level and not so much on a work level. But sometimes we only get glimpses, and we have to be grateful for that. I'm incredibly grateful. I hope that in the response that is coming, the public response, the work response, the political response, the social response that's already forming, I hope that at the same time everyone can keep in mind, not at the exclusion of the work, not at the exclusion of the politics, Aaron as a person, Aaron's soul, Aaron's sense of humor. And I want to just read one thing that is also on the blog that struck me many years ago that I kept, and want to say again here that I think is relevant in a couple different ways. But this is about Aaron's month offline. He posted a blog post about spending 30 days offline. It's a guy who's very difficult to be offline for, like for many of us. So this is a very significant moment for him. Most of all, I felt not just happy, but firmly happy. Solid is the best way I can put it. I felt like I was in control of my life instead of the other way around, like its challenges just bounced off me as I kept doing what I wanted. Normally I feel buffeted by events, 1,000 tiny distractions nagging at the back of my head at all times. Offline, I felt control of my own destiny. I felt, yes, serene. Which I think is a comforting thing to look back on, but I think also potentially relevant for how we think about our reaction here. I hope that our response to Aaron's passing is as much about our souls and our hearts, and Aaron's souls and hearts, as it is about the work that we will continue to carry on for him. Just want to finish with another set of lines from a writer I admire, Up There with Aaron. This is from a song by Leonard Cohen, called Anthem. You can add up the parts, but you won't have the sum. You can strike up the march on your little broken drum. Every heart, to love will come, but like a refugee. Ring the bells that still can ring. Forget your perfect offering. There's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. And I just want to finish by inviting everyone here to recognize that this is a tremendous gift that Aaron's given us, this collection of people of all different ages, from many different backgrounds. And I want to make sure that we take the opportunity and invite you all to introduce yourself to people you don't know, people who touched Aaron's life, people whose life Aaron touched, and keep that connection on a professional level, on the level of the work and the work to be done with the drum, with the march, but also the work of the heart and the soul and the bell. Thank you.
Aaron moved in and out of different institutions. He spent a year in high school, a year in college. He worked with a huge number of different projects. But he moved into people's lives and stayed there. One person whose life he was in and played a huge part in his life was Quinn Norton, our next speaker. Always a close friend, a longtime partner, a great ally in so many things, and a wonderful writer. And the mother of Ada, a daughter who Aaron, I have a very vivid memory of, bought a quadricopter for her, which is a remote control helicopter with 4 blades that's controlled from an iPhone, flies around. And one day, I was at the office, I was working, and Aaron came in and said, "I just bought a quadricopter." And then he had to explain what a quadricopter was, and then explain that it's controlled by an iPhone, and then explain that it was for a 7-year-old. Which totally blew my mind. But when Aaron was 7, he built an ATM. So, anyway, good work.
What Ben didn't mention in that story is that Aaron immediately crashed that quadricopter and destroyed it, and managed to get another one on insurance, which my daughter then crashed and destroyed. After a protracted illness had resolved, I dragged Aaron to Lassen National Monument in California. I just have this very vivid memory of us up on the side of the mountain trying to make a campfire in the rain. And what we finally did, now Aaron complained the whole way through, both about the fact that we were there, that it was raining, that we were trying to make a campfire. But during all of his complaints, he kept gathering and finding driveway and bringing it back to me. And I'd take it and pile it on. And eventually, we got a good mound going, but it was still raining. And we sparked a little stuff underneath, and we covered it with newspaper, and then we gave up. And we went off for a little while and chatted nearby over something that would cover us, or under something that would cover us. And it had time to kind of smolder, and it caught. It caught underneath the paper. And by the time it blew through the paper, it was strong enough to stay lit in the rain. And Aaron jumped up, and I mean, high-fived me like we just wanted to burn it. An event like Aaron's death divides a life. BC and AD one's personal story. From now on, my own biography will divide it into when Aaron was alive and after he died. We look for words that would bring him back. We look for memories that contain him like an incantation. We look for something that can contain that soul. I have 1,000 little pieces of our time together, 1,000 little nets to try and trap the smoke that he now is. But I can't. He slipped away. We loved him, but he's escaped me. Aaron left us and entered the realm of myth-making not long after. He doesn't belong to any one of us anymore, not even himself. He belongs to memory, history, time, and hope. Still, I lost a person that day, and a person that I cared for very deeply. And that's actually who I've come to talk about. Not the internet saint, or the incredibly accomplished activist, or the young and notable internet technologist. The Aaron that I've come to talk about is the one who sang who almost never did any of the damn dishes. The one who stole my camera to take long exposures of Ada and I when we were sleeping. The one that complained all the way through all the camping trips. And grinning, always agreed to the next one. The one that climbed 30 feet up to the top of a tree in Northern California and sat there insisting he liked it and wouldn't have any trouble getting back down for quite some time. Aaron Schwartz ate a lot of water crackers. A lot of water crackers. I spent a huge amount of time studying how to feed Aaron, in time, I managed to consistently get a few vegetables down him on a regular basis. Mostly, I managed to feed him cakes and cookies and creme brulee. And he eventually came to introduce me to another foodie friend of his, and we conspired to feed him. And that conspiring eventually turned into a rich friendship and me helping with a cookbook, which we gave Aaron. Only kind of work. He was terrible about making plans at the last minute. Aaron could be a real pain in the ass to deal with. But he was so there with you. He was so in the space with you. He had this special quality, which I've noticed again now seeing so many people, that almost everyone who has something they're passionate about eventually said, well, that was the thing that Aaron always said he wanted to be. So I have the impression he wanted to be a writer. My sociologist friend has the impression he wanted to be a sociologist. And Aaron was doomed from the beginning to just be Aaron, to defy these categories. We talk about how extraordinary he was, but actually he wasn't. He was another human being with all the flaws and glories that each of us have, each of us an infinite well of solitude. He was scared and self-conscious. He could be funny and greedy and petty and loving and curious and hopeful and strange. He was irreducible. He was difficult. A person, the most complex thing we've yet found in our universe. He turned to me once in the movie theater and said, like someone who just realized the answer to a difficult math problem, I contain multitudes. However, to call Aaron extraordinary is in a way to sidestep the message of happening in his life. The only reason we're all here at this memorial holding up this 26-year-old as a paragon is that in a culture ruled by fear, he learned and taught me that trying was more important than being afraid. Don't worry, he told me, no one remembers your failures. Don't waste time doing small things and being cautious. We're here because he did so much in his 26 years, despite the culture saying you have to be careful and risk nothing. Be responsible, be deferential, go through the proper channels. He rejected all that. He didn't wait to start living, and that's all it took. He understood that his curiosity was all the license he needed. It was the only permission to participate in the world. And when the world didn't understand that, he taught it to them. He understood that learning was more important than accreditation, and that intelligence is a poor and pale substitute for caring. He burned with a love for humanity, and he surrounded himself with people, all so infinitely complex, you people, struck down by the love of the world. He lived a life of thought and action, and that is the rarest thing in this world. Right now, this moment in history, to marry our thoughts and our actions. We shared an understanding that life is a thing made in the living of it. And he inspired me. And here in the AD, I will carry that little inspiration like a jewel gripped in my hand. Beautiful, valuable, abrasive, and possible to forget. To read a poem by Edna Sigmund called First Thing. My candle burns at both ends. It will not last the night. But ah, my foes and oh, my friends, it gives a lovely night. Thank you.
Interlude. Damien Kulash from the band OK Go, I really like. Here is a nice song.
Yeah.
This is a song by a band called Lavender Man. It's called Everyone's Hearts Breaking Now.
Everybody's heart's breaking now, and you feel the world is ending somehow, and you wonder how you find a way out. Oh, everybody's heart's breaking now. Everybody's heart's breaking now, when the oceans and the rivers run round, and what's living inside of them's drowned. Oh, everybody's heart's breaking now, breaking now, breaking now. Everybody's heart's breaking now, when the children are coming down, and there's so much that's wasted downtown. Oh, everybody's heart's breaking now, breaking now, breaking now. Breaking now, breaking now, breaking now. Oh, everybody's heart's breaking now, and the children are coming down. Oh, everybody's heart's breaking now, and the children are coming down.
but I learned a lot about technology from him. And one thing that I learned about was agile method of software development, which is practiced at ThoughtWorks. And in agile software development, the idea is you make things right away, put it in front of real people, and then see what doesn't work, and then fix that, and then make it again. And you're constantly building and changing things, and it's something that works incredibly well in technology. In print products, it doesn't work quite as well, but we tried to use the same principles. You'll find a typo on the front of your program. 2012 should be 2013. But Aaron would always try stuff. And one of the things I loved about him was his combination of sort of reverence and fearlessness. So if he found something that was fascinating or interesting, he would just reach out to whoever it was that was doing that thing and start learning from them and talking to them. Which I think is how it came to be that one day he came over to my place and he'd just been visiting with Edward Tufte, who's a revered and amazing sort of founder of the field of the visual display of quantitative information. Edward Tufte is here today, and he's going to talk to us about his Aaron Schwartz, which was part of the multitudes of Aaron Schwartzes that we all know, in one way or another.
Aaron first encountered me at Stanford in 2005 and promptly posted a very funny account about looking for my ghostly presence. He tells the story of how he had a choice between taking a final exam and or coming to hear me talk. As it turned out, he did both. We then would meet over the years for a long talk every now and then, and my responsibility was essentially to provide him with a reading list for life. And then about 2 years ago, Quinn and Aaron came to Connecticut, and he told me about the 4.5 million downloads of scholarly articles. And my first question was, why isn't MIT celebrating this? Then I told him, actually I had a problem with what he did, because probably of those 4.5 million scholarly articles, only about 1,000 or 2,000 deserved reading. What we needed in downloading was, in addition, was a quality control mechanism, and that would ensure that the material deserved to be downloaded by Aaron. And so I suggested that he combine his search or his downloading of articles with a link to the citation index, and so he could download articles that have been cited more often than just by the author's mother. Either at that meeting or maybe at the next one, we talked a little bit about the legal case. Maybe it was right before he was indicted. And he asked me if I knew Bill Bowen. I think he knew the answer to that question. Bill Bowen was president of Princeton when I started out, and was enormously helpful in my career there. He then became president of the Mellon Foundation, and he retired from the Mellon Foundation, but he was asked by the foundation to handle the problem of JSTOR and Aaron. So I wrote Bill Bowen an email about it, And I said first that Aaron was a treasure. And then I told a personal story about how I had done some illegal hacking as a student and been caught at it and what happened. In 1962, my housemate and I invented the first blue box. That's a device that allows for free, undetectable, unbillable long-distance telephone calls. And we got this up and played around with it, and the end of our research came when we completed what we thought was the longest long-distance telephone call ever made, which was from Palo Alto to New York time of day via Hawaii. Well, during our experimentation, AT&T on the second day, it turned out, had tapped our phone, and but it wasn't until about 6 months later when I got a call from a gentleman, A.J. Dodge, senior security person at AT&T, and I said, I know what you're calling about. And so we met, and he said, you know, what we're doing is a crime, network and all that. But I knew it wasn't serious because he actually cared about the kind of engineering stuff and complained that the tone signals we were generating were not up to standard because they recorded them and played them back into the network to see what numbers we were trying to reach, and they couldn't break through some of the noise of our signal. The upshot of it was that, and he asked why we went off the air after about 3 months, because this was to make long-distance telephone calls free. And I said, well, it was regarded as an engineering problem, but we made the longest long-distance call, and so that was it. And so the deal was that, as I explained in my email to Bill Bowen, the deal was that we wouldn't try to sell this. We were told that, I was told that crime syndicates would pay a great deal for this. We wouldn't do any more of it, and that we would turn our equipment over to AT&T, and so they got a complete vacuum tube oscillator kit for making long-distance phone calls. But I was grateful for